So Thanksgiving is coming, I hear. People tend to like that. There's a lot of good food for Thanksgiving. That's just my experience. I have a feeling some of you might have encountered similar things. My house, we're all vegetarians, so I think the turkey is a little bit more thankful for. In our house, we kind of still do all of this big fare, and we kind of go around the room, around the table, and we do follow along like lots of other folks and say, what are we thankful for? We have a lot to be thankful for. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm trying to move into this space and trying to say, what is it that we should be focusing on this Shabbat? And I think the message obviously is going to be about gratitude, because we're taught to say thank you and be polite, but I don't think a lot of us really own this sense of gratitude. It's two totally different things. I know we all say thank you, and that's very nice, but gratitude is going to open up a different kind of a door. You know, in the Jewish community, when we hear this word Jew, it has lots of connotations, but the idea of Jew, Yehudi, comes from Judah. You know, one of our patriarch sons, Judah, Yehudah, the fourth son actually of Jacob and Leah. And Yehudah, as we read in the book of Genesis, we see that he's given this name because there's a sense of appreciation of gratitude. The text says, she became pregnant again and bore a son and said, this time I will give thanks to God. Therefore she named his son Yehudah, which means giving thanks. So Yehudah, Judah, Jew, Yehudi, it's all about gratitude. Gratitude, hoda'ah. And even in our casual language, in Hebrew at least, we'll say todah. So, we're familiar a little bit with this word. But let's go a little deeper then. One of the most essential qualities of being Jewish, it's true for other faith traditions, of course, but for this particular approach in this house, a synagogue, when we're focusing on the Jewish community, we think about what's an essential quality about being Jewish, and that is to have a sense of gratitude. And I think gratitude gives us a proper perspective on how we see the world, the high points and the not so high points. The Hebrew word for thanks, hoda'ah, includes in it an understanding and acknowledgement. It acknowledges a number of things, that we don't live in a vacuum. It's all by ourselves, not that kind of vacuum. Now I know why she's laughing. No, it's not that, we don't live all by ourselves. That would be kind of cool though. We don't live all by ourselves, exclusive, alone. We are supposed to have encounters, and it forces us to go out of our comfort zones and be tempted to move into new places that might be less familiar. And when we enter into that place and say thank you, we are recognizing another human being in front of us. We are recognizing that there is somebody else aside from me. And I feel like in our society, we're kind of been raised and trained to say it's really all about me. That there is no more important thing than to find success rather than significance. And it's important to make a living. And I was just having a conversation. My father died, and our congregants here know this, when I was a kid. And in this conversation just the other day about, what would our parents have liked for us, my father, this whole rabbi gig, I don't think it would have worked for him. I don't think so. He would have wanted me to make a living, right? To go out there and have an income and do good things with that. There is something else, though, about finding our balance. I think when we have a Shabbat that bumps into Thanksgiving, we look at the ancient Israelite sources of Sukkot. Sukkot, that festival of the booths, it's all about gratitude for our harvest. That was sort of the myth of Thanksgiving, was supposed to be appreciation of a bounty. But now we have this great rabbi of a 20th century, Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he says that humankind will not perish for want of information, it'll perish for a want of appreciation. We learn, we access, we take, but what do we truly appreciate? 1 out of every 3 people on earth are chronically malnourished, and we complain about the high cost of dining out. 25 nations have per capita incomes of less than $1,000 per year, and we complain about our income tax. More than 43 million Americans live in poverty. And our government's poverty line, what they determine is poverty, is $24,600 for a family of 4 living in the United States. And we complain how expensive college tuition is. So we pass our days preoccupied with ourselves, and we fail a little bit to see beyond ourselves and figure out what is truly most important, and that's true for all of us. Certainly for me. I have another teaching I want to share. There's a Hasidic teaching. The rabbis in the Hasidic community often think about palaces and castles and finding a way in order to approach God's throne. So this story has a palace, and then it has many halls. And in every one, visitors who come into the palace find a new treasure. And at first they wonder how the treasures got there. But after a while, they don't really care. They're not really thinking about how all of those treasures got into each and all of those rooms. They're just busy filling up their pockets. And when the time they finish, they no longer remember why they came to the palace in the first place. What did they enter into that palace to seek? They were just so distracted by the treasure. Meanwhile, at the end of all of those different hallways, the king is still waiting for any guest to come and show up, but is left alone. He's waiting for those of his subjects who think of him rather than the treasure. I think to say thank you is to think of our Creator, to recognize that there is more beyond us. And one of my favorite teachings in the Torah, in fact, says that on your property, your own property, when you harvest and you take all of the crops and everything and you're going to bring it to market and you feed your family and you're going to make your living, which is all really important, it's your property. Well, the corners, it's not really your property. We're going to say that it's your property because we need laws to manage civilization, but it really belongs to God. And if that's the case, the corners have to be left for the poor. They don't have to ask, don't have to humble or humiliate themselves with asking. They're entitled to it because our property just kind of lent to us. It's really God's property, and we have to remember to share what we don't actually own. Think about even the blessing over the bread. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We thank God for bringing forth bread from the earth. When have you ever seen bread come from the earth? Who has seen a bread plant? It doesn't work that way. But if you think of the raw materials that God has given, and if you think about the work of the farmer, and you think about how the farmer is going to take all of that wheat and bring it to a mill, and is going to get it to a baker, and somebody's going to drive it to Whole Foods, and all of this process, you have a lot of people who have a role in using their gifts and labor to bring you bread and me. And that we should be grateful for. So the rabbis teach whoever doesn't say that blessing, it's as if they're stealing from God. It's as if you're stealing from God because we don't have that sense of recognition, appreciation, understanding that the world isn't just about me, but that is kind of how we're trained. I want to tell you a story. I'm going to end with this story. The story was in some other rabbi's sermon. And the story comes from a book by a fellow named Richard Seltzer. And in the book, which is called Mortal Lessons, Notes on the Art of Surgery. And Seltzer tells of a young woman who has just been wheeled out of surgery. And outside in the corridor, her husband is waiting. And the surgeon walks over to them and says, "We removed the tumor. The surgery went well. But there was something in the surgeon's eyes that says things didn't go all that well. And he continued to say, we had to sever a facial nerve to get at the tumor. The nerve controls the muscles in the mouth. And then there's a pause. And then the husband asks, but otherwise she's going to be okay. And the surgeon says, of course, yes, she's going to be fine. Other than that, she'll be perfectly fine. And then the husband's eyes are alight, and they're filled with joy, and says, thank God, and I was afraid. That's the husband's reaction. And later, the nurses wheel her into a room, and she's awake, and her husband gazes down at her, and he sees that her mouth is twisted in a palsy. And she asks him, will my mouth always be like this? And he leans toward her, and he says very gently, to remove the tumor in your cheek, they had to cut the nerve. She nods and is still silent. Tears well up in her eyes. But then he smiles, and he says, I like it. And then unmindful about anything, he just bends down and he kisses her crooked mouth. And the physician who witnesses this, he can see how the young man he twists his own lips in order to accommodate hers, to show her that their kiss still works. That is a story of gratitude for more chances, for the gifts of physicians and nurses and insurance, for love, for the slight glance or encounter of the giver and creator of life. That man had a representation of Yehuda in him, to recognize how to encounter somebody that was so precious to him. And the rest doesn't really matter. Just grateful that she was going to be there and present for whatever rest of their lives they could manage. So Yehuda, the one who embodies gratitude, lives out that gratitude by standing up for others, for living with strength to do right, and at least to do better. May we be like Yehuda. May we be like Judah, aware and honest, willing to step forward, able to see others with their whole true selves. Let's turn back.